Hello, Chris. It's 11:20 and the power is out in Oakwood, but I'm still going to record this uh, for you. Um, so I guess I'll just get right into it. I'm first going to answer question number one about Hume, which is Hume correct that reason in its representational capacity, telling us matters of fact, cannot by itself furnish us with motives for actions? In other words, is Hume correct in that only desire or passion can serve as a necessary ingredient in human motivation? Um, I disagree with Hume uh, because I think on both points, I think reason um, nor desire or passion can be the sole motivator um, behind, or is the sole motivator behind human motivation. Um, because I think there's a third category, which would be fear. For this, I look at prisoner of war camps, slavery, gulags, forced labor of any kind. The main motivator behind this kind of labor is not a desire to do good work or some kind of rational, reasonable explanation, but instead a fear of consequence and a fear of punishment. Um, and I think that that's a very important distinction to make because at some point someone could uh, try and say that uh, the fear is just the desire to not be punished. But I think that any time that you equate fear with a desire, that's that's a dangerous dangerous move to make because of the consequences and all kinds of terrible consequences come from that. And so I think, but in terms of the relationship between reason and desire in decision making, I think you can't have one without the other. Otherwise, the decision making process will be uh, worse off. So I think uh, reason and desire together make for good decision making. Um, but if you have only reason and no desire, then you develop a sort of mathematical, utilitarian uh, decision making process, which is overall not beneficial for people in general. But if you have only desire and no reason, that leads to rash decision making without thinking about consequences, or making good judgments about what will be needed to make the decisions. Um, and so I think in order to have good decision making and and uh, and have good actions, you must have a little bit of both. Um, so for the second question, I'm going to answer uh, question two about Berkeley, which is about his answer to the problem of evil. I actually wrote my paper on this, and I think that Berkeley's idealism kind of falls up. Well, I think it completely falls apart at the problem of evil, and the difference between Berkeley and Leibniz uh, is the the direct relationship between God and evil. With Berkeley, the only way that it can make sense is if God is um, directly putting the evil ideas in the minds of human or in the minds of humans, and that directly contradicts the nature of the God that Christians serve. And so I think that at that point, his entire idealism just kind of falls apart. So I find that his uh, his reasoning is even less compelling than Leibniz monads, which is I didn't think that that could be, but it is. Um, and it is just because of that direct relationship between um, God and the evil that happens in the world, because within Berkeley's system, the only way that evil can happen is if Berkeley is directly influencing it to happen. Um, and I find that extremely problematic. If that's the case, then God can't be omnibenevolent. Um, and the only other answer, which he kind of leans towards this answer, is that that there's imagining the idea of perfection to mean balance. But I don't. There's a problem in there for me, because perfection doesn't mean balance. Balance means balance, and you can't go and uh, change the things that words mean just to serve your purpose. I think we can get into a lot of dangerous situations if we allow that. A third answer to the problem of evil in Berkeley's um, idealism is that the thoughts are not gods, so the evil thoughts are not gods, but that sets up God to be a somewhat schizophrenic um, being that doesn't have complete control over his own thoughts. And I find that even more problematic than the first explanation, because if we are living in a world that is entirely in God's mind, but God doesn't even have control of the thoughts in there, or all the thoughts in there are not God's, well, then whose are they? What are they? That's extremely problematic. That's a very dangerous place to be. And so, no, I don't find Berkeley's answers to the problem of evil at all compelling. I think the problem of evil, when you bring it up with Berkeley, it completely destroys um, his idealism, or at least that's what I think. And the final question on Locke is going to be the second one, on the natural right to property. I found Locke's explanation of the right to property interesting, because he makes a couple of moves. The first move that he makes is to make sure that there is an understanding that man owns his own body, and then the next step is man owns his own labor, and then the next step after that is that once man works the land, then the land is has become man's labor. Um, I think I think it works. Um, I think it's tenable. The problem is that uh, the second point is where people would have an issue, or um, make a rejection of his position, because it's specifically in America. When you start talking about owning labor, it immediately goes to socialism, which a lot of people really dislike. Not me personally, but and so I think that that's the most problematic part of his explanation for the right to property. But I do think that it works. I find it convincing, um, and I think it even works. He is talking most specifically about an agrarian society. So once man works the fields, then the fields have become a product of man's labor. And so then man owns the fields because he owns his own body and the work of his body. Um, and I think that works in an agrarian society. It gets more difficult when you go to a modern industrial society, because man is no longer working the property that he owns. Um, and I think at a certain point, uh, Locke's justification for the ownership of property kind of destroys capitalism at, in a way that, like, people owning land which is being worked by other people would be completely backwards to Locke. And I personally think that there's nothing wrong with that. I find um, Locke's explanation to be convincing. But I do think that it proves problematic in our current American society, our current capitalist American society. In an agrarian society, I think it works perfectly, but we would have to flesh it out and figure out how it applies in a modern industrial society. Uh, but I personally find it to be fairly convincing. So there's my final. Sorry it's so dark. Um, I was it was 10 o'clock, and I was working on what I was going to say, and the power around the city went out. So I have a headlamp here that is providing light for me. Um, but I wanted to make sure that this got done. So thank you for the semester. Um, and I will see you next year when I come back to campus. Um, Goodbye.